The sun was sinking low over the Texas suburbs, casting a soft orange glow across the neat rows of houses. Claire Dawson drove slowly down the quiet street, her eyes heavy from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. She was exhausted, but the thought of walking into her cozy home, maybe smelling something cooking, and hearing her husband's voice calling from the kitchen gave her a small smile. That was the comfort she clung to after long days. Daniel, her anchor. Claire parked the car and stepped out, adjusting her nurse's bag on her shoulder. The neighborhood was unusually silent. No kids on bikes, no barking dogs, no hum of lawnmowers. Just the chirp of cicadas and the distant hum of traffic. She brushed it off as nothing unusual. After all, it was dinner hour. Unlocking the door, she stepped inside. The living room was dark. Normally, Daniel would have a lamp on, maybe the TV playing a ball game. Tonight, the silence pressed against her chest. She frowned and called out, "Danny? I'm home." No answer. She set her bag down, listening. The air felt strange. Thick. There was a scent she couldn't quite place, metallic and heavy, lingering in the back of her throat. At first, she thought maybe Daniel had tried cooking something new and burned it. She chuckled nervously to herself, whispering, "God, please don't let him burn the kitchen down." She walked through the house, calling his name again. "Daniel? You here?" Her voice echoed back at her, unnerving in its loneliness. Then she heard it, the hiss and bubble of boiling water coming from the kitchen. Relief rushed through her for a moment. Of course, he was cooking. That had to be it. She hurried toward the sound, eager to see him, to slip into the ordinary comfort of domestic life. But the smell grew stronger the closer she got. Not just burnt food, something sour, rancid, almost sweet in a sickening way. Her stomach turned. She reached for the kitchen door, her hand trembling without her realizing it. The door creaked open. The kitchen light was on, casting a harsh yellow glare across the counters. On the stove sat a huge stock pot, steam rising in thick clouds, fogging the windows. The water inside rolled and churned violently, bubbles bursting at the surface. "Daniel." Her voice cracked as she stepped closer. She expected him to turn from the counter with a sheepish grin, maybe admit he'd botched another recipe. But the kitchen was empty. She froze when she looked down into the pot. At first, she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Pale shapes twisting beneath the surface, not vegetables, not meat she recognized. Something human. A hand. Fingers. Her breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled. She staggered back, her mind screaming at her to deny what her eyes told her. But the truth hit like a hammer. That was Daniel, her husband. Pieces of him boiling in their own kitchen. Claire let out a strangled cry, clutching the counter for support. The sound tore through the silence of the house, raw and animal. She stumbled to the phone on the wall, her hands shaking so violently she could barely punch the numbers. 911. She gasped when the operator answered. Please, it's my husband. He's. Her voice broke into sobs. The operator's calm voice tried to steady her, but Claire's world was already unraveling. Her gaze flicked back toward the stove, toward the pot that still hissed and steamed, as if mocking her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, almost to herself, "Oh God, Daniel, what did they do to you?" The sirens in the distance began to wail, but for Claire, time had already collapsed into a nightmare she could never wake from. The sirens grew louder, tearing through the quiet neighborhood, their wailing echo bouncing off the rows of houses. Red and blue lights flashed against the Dawson home, spilling through the windows and painting the walls in a strobing glow. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway, still clutching the phone receiver, her knuckles white, her body trembling. When the front door burst open, two uniformed officers stormed in, their voices sharp and commanding. "Ma'am, step away from the kitchen." Now, Claire stumbled back, hands raised instinctively, her tear-streaked face twisted in confusion. Please, you have to help him. My husband, Her voice cracked before she could finish the sentence. The officers moved past her, their eyes locking onto the stove. One froze mid-step, his breath catching audibly. The other swore under his breath and immediately called it in. Within minutes, the once quiet street was filled with squad cars, paramedics, and detectives. Neighbors clustered on their porches, whispering, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what had gone so terribly wrong inside the Dawson household. Claire sat slumped on the living room couch, her head in her hands. A blanket was draped over her shoulders by a paramedic, though she barely felt its weight. The walls seemed to close in, every second dragging her deeper into disbelief. Detective Marcus Hill entered with a commanding presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by years of experience, he exuded authority without needing to raise his voice. He scanned the room quickly, his sharp eyes taking in everything. The pot still bubbling on the stove, the crime scene text moving in, and the broken woman on the couch. He approached her slowly, crouching down to meet her eye level. "Mrs. Dawson? My name's Detective Marcus Hill. I know this is hard, but I need you to take a deep breath and tell me exactly what happened." Claire lifted her head, her eyes swollen and bloodshot. I came home from work, and I smelled something. I thought he was cooking, but then I saw." Her words trailed off into a sob. Marcus nodded, his voice steady, almost gentle. "Take your time. You're safe now. We'll find out who did this." But even as he spoke, suspicion flickered in his gaze. Protocol demanded it. In most domestic murders, the spouse was the first suspect. And the grotesque brutality of this crime, it almost suggested passion, anger, betrayal. Who else would have the opportunity, the access, the motive? As the forensic team worked in the kitchen, a young officer approached Marcus. "Detective, you need to see this." Marcus rose, giving Claire a reassuring look before walking to the kitchen. He pulled on gloves and leaned over the pot. The acrid steam burned his nostrils, but his expression remained composed. The body was dismembered, boiled beyond recognition in some parts, yet still horrifyingly human. He clenched his jaw and turned to the officer. "Seal this place off. No one goes in or out without my say-so. This isn't just a homicide. It's a message." Back in the living room, Claire overheard enough to feel her chest tighten. She stood suddenly, her blanket falling to the floor. "Detective, I didn't do this. I swear to you, I love Daniel. He was my whole life." Marcus studied her, his dark eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm not saying you did. But until we have answers, we have to consider every possibility, including you." Her mouth fell open, shock overtaking grief. "Me? You think I could do that to him? To my husband?" He didn't flinch. "I think I need to rule nothing out. That's my job." The words cut deeper than a knife. Claire's knees weakened, and she sank back down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands once more. Outside, the murmurs of neighbors grew louder as news began to spread. To them, she was already guilty, the grieving widow turned monster in a single night. Marcus stepped outside, scanning the crowd, then lit a cigarette despite the disapproving glance of a fellow officer. He muttered to himself, "Someone wanted this man gone in the worst way, and I'll be damned if I don't find out who." As the crime scene stretched into the early hours of the morning, the Dawson home became less of a sanctuary and more of a prison of secrets. And for Claire, the nightmare had only just begun. The next morning, the Dawson house was sealed off with yellow tape, the once cheerful front porch now a stage for whispers and speculation. News vans lined the street, reporters speaking into cameras, their voices sharp and dramatic. Horrific discovery in a quiet Texas neighborhood. Claire watched from the window of the guest room at the police station, where she had been brought after a sleepless night. She felt like the walls were closing in. Detective Marcus Hill entered with a folder tucked under his arm, his face as unreadable as stone. He set the file on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat across from Claire. His calm voice held an edge of steel. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I need you to answer straight. No holding back, no protecting anyone. Understand? Claire nodded, her hands twisted in her lap. I'll tell you everything I know. Good. He flipped open the folder. When was the last time you saw your husband alive? Yesterday morning, she whispered. I left for work around 6. He was still asleep. I kissed him on the cheek before I left. Did he mention any plans for the day? She shook her head. Not really. He said he might fix the fence. That's all. Marcus studied her face, then leaned forward. Claire, I need you to be honest. Did you and Daniel fight recently? Her eyes widened. No. I mean, couples argue sometimes, sure. But nothing serious. I loved him, detective. I loved him. He tapped his pen against the folder, weighing her words. Funny thing, Mrs. Dawson. Your husband wasn't exactly the man everyone thought he was. She froze. What do you mean? Marcus slid a photo across the table, a snapshot of Daniel with another woman at a bar, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. Do you know her? Claire's breath caught. She had never seen the woman before. No, who is she? Her name's Angela Ruiz. Works at a local lounge. According to our sources, your husband was seeing her. Regularly. Claire's heart dropped into her stomach. No. Daniel wouldn't. She stopped, remembering the late nights, the unexplained phone calls, the sudden business trips. Little cracks in the marriage she had chosen to ignore. Tears welled in her eyes. Oh God, he lied to me. Marcus didn't soften. That's not all. He was also in deep debt, gambling, bad loans, some shady dealings. We found records in his workshop. The man owed money to people who don't forgive easily. Claire's voice trembled. Why didn't he tell me? Why keep all of this from me? Maybe to protect you. Maybe because he was ashamed. Or maybe because he didn't think you'd ever find out. Marcus closed the folder and fixed her with a steady gaze. The truth is, Mrs. Dawson, your husband had enemies. More than one. And someone finally decided to collect. Claire sat in stunned silence, the world tilting beneath her. The man she thought she knew, the husband she had trusted, was a stranger. Her grief twisted into anger, confusion, betrayal. Marcus stood, slipping the folder under his arm again. We also found something else. A burner phone in your garage, hidden in a toolbox. Calls and texts to numbers tied to loan sharks. Whoever killed Daniel might be connected to those calls. Claire's voice rose, sharp and desperate. Detective, I didn't know about any of this. Please, you have to believe me. Marcus paused at the door. Believing you isn't my job, Mrs. Dawson. Finding the truth is. And right now, the truth is ugly. When the door shut behind him, Claire collapsed into sobs, her hands shaking. She had walked into her kitchen expecting dinner and found a nightmare. Now, layer by layer, that nightmare was peeling back to reveal something even darker. The life her husband had lived in shadows. Claire pressed her palms against her eyes, desperate to push back the tears, but the memories came rushing in anyway. She remembered the night Daniel had taken her to Galveston Beach for their anniversary. They had shared cheap wine from a plastic cup, laughing as waves lapped at their feet. He had promised her then, no matter what happens, Claire, I'll always take care of you. The promise now echoed like a cruel joke. The man who swore to protect her had left her nothing but lies and debts. Her chest heaved with sobs as she thought about all the nights she had defended him to her friends, insisting he was faithful, insisting he was honest. She also remembered the little things, the way he left sticky notes on the fridge with doodled hearts, the sound of his laugh when they burned pancakes on a Sunday morning. Those pieces of him were real, weren't they? Or had they all been part of the performance, a mask covering the rot beneath? Her mind snapped back to the kitchen, to the pot, to the smell that would never leave her senses. Every time she blinked, she saw it again, steam rising, bubbles breaking, flesh twisting. The image fused with her memories until she no longer knew which Daniel was real, the man on the beach or the body in the boiling water. Claire gripped the edge of the table and whispered into the empty room. Why did you do this to me, Daniel? Why did you make me love you? The silence offered no answer, only the weight of betrayal pressing heavier on her heart. By the third day, the Dawson home had become more than just a crime scene. It was a spectacle. The yellow tape fluttered in the breeze. Reporters stood with microphones at the end of the driveway, and curious neighbors lingered on lawns, whispering behind cupped hands. What had once been a quiet, friendly suburban street now pulsed with gossip and fear. Claire, temporarily staying at her sister Lydia's house across town, could feel the eyes of the community on her everywhere she went. At the grocery store, a woman she'd known for years pretended not to see her. At the gas station, two men lowered their voices as she walked past, but she caught enough to know they were talking about her. Did you hear what they found? The wife had to know something. They always do. Who else would have had the time? The words stung like glass against her skin. She wanted to scream that she wasn't a killer, that she had loved Daniel despite his secrets, but her voice carried no weight against the tide of suspicion. Detective Marcus Hill knew it too. That evening, he sat at the precinct flipping through statements from neighbors. Each account painted Daniel as a man not quite the saint everyone pretended. Mrs. Connolly from across the street swore she'd seen Daniel arguing with a man in a black truck 2 weeks before the murder. Mr. Evans, the mailman, recalled delivering letters marked past due almost daily. Another neighbor mentioned loud fights between Daniel and Claire, though Claire insisted they were nothing more than ordinary spats. The whispers were piling up, and in a small Texas town, whispers could bury the truth faster than a shovel. Back at Lydia's house, Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Lydia reached across, squeezing her sister's hand. You don't have to face them, Claire. Let the police do their job. Claire shook her head, her eyes glassy. They all think I killed him. You should have seen the way that woman looked at me in the store today. Like I'm some kind of monster. You're not, Lydia said firmly. Don't let them make you believe it. But Claire's heart was sinking under the weight of betrayal. The man she thought she knew had gambled their future away, slept with another woman, and owed debts to dangerous people. And now she was paying the price for his sins. Meanwhile, Marcus followed his instincts to the local lounge where Angela Ruiz worked. The dim lighting, smoky air, and loud jukebox painted a stark contrast to the Dawson household. Angela, striking and sharp-eyed, leaned against the bar as Marcus slid onto a stool. You knew Daniel Dawson, Marcus said, his voice calm but edged. Angela arched a brow. Knew? Sure. We went out a few times. He wasn't exactly faithful, detective. Not to me, not to anyone. Marcus studied her carefully. Did he owe you money? She smirked bitterly. Daniel owed everyone money. Men like him don't quit until they run out of rope. I wasn't his only problem. Her words added fuel to the fire. More secrets, more shadows. Marcus left the lounge with a gnawing certainty. Daniel Dawson had been a man standing in quicksand, and someone had decided to pull him under for good. By the week's end, the media frenzy reached its peak. News anchors used words like grisly, macabre, and domestic nightmare. Talk radio hosts speculated endlessly. Did the wife snap? Was this revenge for infidelity? Claire sat alone in Lydia's guest room, staring at the ceiling, her tears drying on her cheeks. She whispered to the empty air. I didn't kill you, Daniel, but you sure left me to clean up your mess. Outside, the world kept spinning, but for Claire Dawson, every whisper, every suspicious glance, every headline was another nail in the coffin of her innocence. The morgue was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint clicking of instruments being laid out on metal trays. Detective Marcus Hill stood at the observation window, his jaw tight, as the county medical examiner, Dr. Elise Garner, prepared her report. She was meticulous, a woman who let the evidence tell its story without emotion. Marcus had seen his share of crime scenes, but this case lingered in a different way. The brutality wasn't just about killing, it was about erasing. Whoever had done this to Daniel Dawson wanted to strip him of identity, reduce him to nothing more than fragments in a pot. It wasn't rage alone, it was a message. Dr. Garner pulled down her mask and approached Marcus with a clipboard. Her voice was steady, clinical, but the words carried weight. He was alive when he was drugged, she began. Traces of a powerful sedative were found in his bloodstream, enough to knock him unconscious within minutes. Marcus frowned. So he wasn't killed first? She shook her head. No, he would have been out cold, unaware. The actual cause of death appears to be asphyxiation, likely smothered before the dismemberment. Everything else happened post-mortem. Marcus scribbled notes, but his mind was already racing. A sedative, smothering, then disposal. That meant planning. This wasn't a crime of passion committed in a fit of rage. It was orchestrated. Dr. Garner continued, her tone darker now. There were also ligature marks on his wrists and ankles. He was restrained before the sedative fully took effect. Marcus exhaled slowly. The image formed in his mind. Daniel, bound and drugged, powerless, while someone he may have trusted carried out the unimaginable. What about time of death? Marcus asked. Between 4 and 6 p.m., Garner replied. Hours before Mrs. Dawson arrived home. That part of her story checks out. Marcus nodded. It didn't clear Claire completely. Suspicion rarely evaporated that easily, but it gave her breathing room. If the timeline held, someone else had been in that house before Claire ever stepped through the door. Then Garner added the detail that made Marcus pause. We found partial prints on a latex glove recovered from the Dawson garage. They're smudged, but there's enough ridge detail to run a match. Marcus's eyes hardened. Good. Run it through AFIS. I want results fast. Later that evening, Marcus gathered his team in the precinct's conference room. Photos of Daniel's dismembered body, the boiling pot, and the garage evidence were pinned on the board. Officers sat grim-faced, coffee cups in hand, as Marcus laid out the findings. This wasn't spontaneous, Marcus said, his deep voice steady. The killer brought drugs, restraints, and a plan. They subdued him, smothered him, and then used the pot to try and destroy evidence. That's not anger. That's calculation. A rookie officer raised his hand hesitantly. Sir, could this still be the wife? Maybe she hired someone. Marcus shook his head. Nothing points to that yet. She didn't know about the affairs, the debts, or the burner phone. If anything, she's another victim, left to drown in his lies. The room fell silent, the weight of the case pressing down on them. Hours later, alone in his office, Marcus lit a cigarette and stared at the evidence photos. He thought of Claire's broken face, her voice cracking with disbelief. He thought of Angela Ruiz, bitter and unapologetic at the lounge. And he thought of the debts, money owed to men who didn't mind sending bloody warnings. His phone buzzed. It was Dr. Garner again. Detective Hill? We ran the prints. They don't belong to Claire Dawson. They match Travis McMillan. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling smoke through his nose. Travis, Daniel's best friend. The man who'd been at family barbecues, who'd toasted at their anniversary, who'd once helped paint the nursery that was now just a storage room. Marcus muttered to himself, his voice low and grim. Well, Travis, looks like you just moved to the top of my list. At that moment, Claire Dawson sat alone in her sister's guest room, staring at her wedding photo on the nightstand. She traced Daniel's smiling face with her finger, her voice breaking into the dark silence. Who were you, Daniel? Who were you, really? Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the sky itself knew that secrets were about to crash down with the force of a storm. The interrogation room was cold, its walls painted a dull gray that seemed to drain color from everything inside it. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead. At the steel table sat Travis McMillan, Daniel Dawson's best friend, or at least, that's what everyone thought. His broad shoulders were hunched, his hands clasped tightly, as if holding them still might stop the tremor running through his body. Detective Marcus Hill entered, his presence filling the small space. He dropped a manila folder onto the table with a heavy thud. Travis flinched. Marcus didn't sit right away. He circled the table slowly, studying the man who had once been a fixture at the Dawson home. At barbecues, holidays, Sunday football games. Long time, Travis, Marcus said evenly, finally pulling out the chair across from him. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. You know why you're here. Travis shook his head quickly. I don't. I mean, I heard about Daniel. God, it's horrible, Marcus. Claire must be, she must be losing her mind. His voice cracked, too rehearsed, too quick. Marcus opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It was the latex glove found in Daniel's garage, the partial print enlarged on the evidence sheet. You recognize this? Travis's eyes darted to the photo and then away. No. Should I? Marcus's voice dropped lower, the weight of truth pressing with each syllable. It's yours, Travis. We match the print. You were in that garage. You handled that glove. The question is why? Silence. Travis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His voice came out a whisper. I was just there to help him with some tools. He called me over the other day. Marcus didn't blink. Try again. You expect me to believe you just popped in, left your prints on a glove, and then your best friend ends up butchered in his own kitchen? Travis's hands began to shake. He pressed them flat on the table to steady himself. I didn't kill him, detective. I swear to God. Yeah, I was in the garage, but I didn't touch Daniel. Marcus leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Then who did? Because right now, Travis, the only thing standing between you and a murder charge is a story that makes sense. And yours doesn't. The silence stretched until Travis's composure cracked. He ran a hand over his face, muttering, You don't understand. Daniel wasn't the man you think he was. Marcus kept his gaze locked. Oh, I understand plenty. Gambling debts, women on the side, enemies stacked a mile high. But you were supposed to be his friend. Travis slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing through the room. Friend? He ruined my life. That man cost me everything. Do you know what it's like to watch your best friend steal the woman you loved? To lend him money you'll never get back while he laughed behind your back? His voice rose, raw and trembling. Daniel wasn't a friend. He was poison. Marcus let the words hang in the air. There it was, the motive. Jealousy, betrayal, and years of festering resentment. But confession wasn't guilt. Not yet. Marcus pushed further. So what did you do, Travis? Did you drug him? Tie him up? Watch him beg before you silenced him? Travis's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head violently. No. I hated him, yeah? I wanted to see him pay. But I didn't do that. I couldn't. His voice broke, trailing into silence. Marcus studied him, weighing every flicker of emotion, every stuttered word. He couldn't tell if he was looking at a grieving man betrayed by a friend, or the killer who had boiled his best buddy alive. When Marcus finally stood, he gathered the file and said coldly, You're not walking out of here, Travis. Not tonight. Until I know the truth, you're exactly where you belong. As the door locked behind him, Travis dropped his head into his hands, his muffled sobs filling the empty room. Meanwhile, across town, Claire sat in Lydia's kitchen, staring blankly at her untouched dinner. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Daniel got what he deserved. You're next. Claire's breath caught in her throat as the message burned into her mind. Whoever killed Daniel wasn't finished. Detective Marcus Hill didn't sleep that night. The words Travis had spat across the interrogation table clung to him like smoke. Daniel wasn't a friend. He was poison. It wasn't just anger. It was truth bleeding out from years of betrayal. But Marcus knew something else too. People who feel cheated often blur the line between wanting revenge and taking it. And Daniel Dawson had been tangled in a web that reached further than just Travis McMillan. By morning, Marcus sat at his desk, files spread out like pieces of a shattered puzzle. Bank records showed Daniel had borrowed thousands of dollars, not only from loan sharks, but from friends like Travis, who would never see a cent back. Phone records revealed late-night calls to Angela Ruiz, the woman Claire now knew existed. And another name surfaced, one Marcus hadn't expected: Rachel Monroe, Travis's ex-girlfriend. Daniel hadn't just borrowed money. He'd stolen love. When Marcus visited Claire later that day, she was sitting in Lydia's living room, the threatening text message still glowing on her phone screen. Her hands shook as she held it out. "Detective, someone sent me this last night. Does that look like I'm safe to you?" Marcus read the words, his jaw tightening. "You're next." It wasn't just a cruel taunt, it was a warning. "We'll trace the number," Marcus said firmly. "But Claire, I need you to understand. Daniel's secrets are spilling out. And they're darker than you imagined." She stared at him, her voice breaking. "How much more is there, detective? First the affairs, now the debts. What else haven't I known about the man I slept beside for 10 years? Marcus hesitated, then laid the photo of Rachel Monroe on the table. A younger woman with sharp eyes and a wary smile. He was involved with her too. Rachel was Travis's girlfriend. Daniel took her from him years ago. It didn't last, but the damage did. Claire gasped, covering her mouth. "My God, he destroyed Travis's life." "Not just his," Marcus said. "Your husband lived like rules didn't apply to him. He left wreckage everywhere he went." Tears streamed down Claire's face, but her grief shifted into fury. She slammed her fist against the table, her voice trembling with rage. "And I'm the one the town whispers about. I'm the one people look at like a monster. All because I married him blind." Marcus leaned forward, his voice softer now. "That's why we find out who did this. Because the sins of Daniel Dawson don't belong on your shoulders." Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Travis sat in his holding cell, staring at the wall. His confession of hatred replayed in his head, but he swore to himself he hadn't killed Daniel. When Marcus returned to confront him with the threatening message sent to Claire, Travis lifted his head, his eyes wild. "You think that was me?" he spat. "I don't need to scare her, detective. I already told you. I hated Daniel, not Claire." "Then who sent it?" Marcus pressed. Travis shook his head. "You're chasing the wrong man. Daniel had enemies you don't even know about." He leaned forward, gripping the bars with trembling hands. "He was into things you can't imagine. If you think I'm your killer, you're blind." Marcus walked away, but the words lingered. If Travis wasn't lying, then the net around Daniel was far wider than one bitter friend. That night, Claire sat by the window in Lydia's guest room, clutching the wedding photo she couldn't bear to throw away. Her tears fell onto the glass, smearing Daniel's smiling face. She whispered into the silence, her voice raw. "Who else hated you enough to do this, Daniel? And how many lies did you bury under our roof?" Outside, the night was still. But inside Claire Dawson's heart, the storm was only beginning. The courthouse in downtown Houston was packed. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing as Claire Dawson was escorted inside, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Though she wasn't on trial, her presence drew as much attention as the accused. Everyone wanted to see the grieving widow of Daniel Dawson. Was she victim, accomplice, or something in between? But today, the focus was on Travis McMillan. Shackled, pale, and visibly thinner than when Marcus first questioned him, he entered the courtroom with his attorney by his side. His eyes never once rose to meet Claire's. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Mitchell rose from her seat, her presence commanding. In her 40s, sharp-eyed and quick-tongued, she carried herself like a woman who had sent dozens of killers away for life. She turned to the jury, her voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a random act of violence. It was premeditated. The evidence will show that Travis McMillan, once a friend, lured Daniel Dawson, drugged him, restrained him, and murdered him in cold blood. He didn't stop there. He desecrated Daniel's body in a way meant to send a message born of rage, jealousy, and betrayal." The jurors shifted uneasily in their seats. Even after weeks of news coverage, hearing it laid out in those words made the crime feel raw again. The defense attorney, Frank Wallace, rose with a slow shake of his head. He was older, grayer, but carried the quiet confidence of someone who had saved more than a few men from life sentences. His voice carried a different rhythm, deliberate and calm. What the prosecution calls premeditation, I call speculation. Mr. McMillan had grievances, yes. He had reasons to hate Daniel Dawson, reasons many of you may even sympathize with. But hate is not murder. You will see the state's evidence is circumstantial, stitched together with assumptions. And assumptions do not equal guilt. The first witness called was Dr. Elise Garner, the medical examiner. She described the sedative in Daniel's system, the restraints, the asphyxiation. Her testimony was clinical, but the words painted a picture so grim that one juror visibly covered her mouth. Then came the neighbors. Mrs. Connolly testified to the argument she had overheard between Daniel and a man in a black truck. When asked if that man was Travis, she hesitated, then nodded. Yes, it was him. I'm sure of it. Travis's attorney pounced on cross-examination. You were how far away, ma'am? 50 feet. 60? At night. And you're certain? Or do you only think you're certain because you've been watching the news every day? The tension in the room tightened like a rope. But the real blow came when Caroline Mitchell introduced new evidence, surveillance footage from a pawn shop. On the grainy video, Travis could be seen purchasing duct tape, gloves, and a bottle of industrial cleaner just 2 days before Daniel's death. The jury leaned forward collectively, their faces grim. Caroline's voice rang clear. He wasn't just angry. He was preparing. Travis lowered his head into his hands. The prosecution, sensing the momentum, called one final surprise witness. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as Angela Ruiz was led to the stand. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor, her chin lifted defiantly, as though she were walking a runway instead of testifying in a murder trial. Caroline Mitchell approached. Ms. Ruiz, you knew the victim, Daniel Dawson? Angela smirked faintly. Knew him? He practically lived at my bar. Bought me gifts, made promises he couldn't keep. But he owed me money, thousands. And when I pressed him, he said he had a friend who would take care of it. She shifted her eyes toward Travis, sitting at the defense table. That friend was him. Gasps broke out in the gallery. Travis jerked his head up, his face flushed with anger. She's lying, he shouted, pounding his fist on the table. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. Angela's voice sharpened. Daniel told me he had Travis wrapped around his finger. Said he could make him do anything. But the last time I saw Daniel, he looked scared. Real scared. He said he didn't trust Travis anymore. The jury scribbled furiously, the words landing like nails in Travis's coffin. Caroline stepped back, her gaze cool and deliberate. No further questions. For Claire, sitting stiffly in the gallery, Angela's testimony was like a knife twist. Another reminder that Daniel had lied to her, betrayed her, and dragged everyone around him into a whirlpool of destruction. When the defense presented their case, Frank Wallace tried to pivot. He argued that Travis bought those items for routine home repairs. He brought in a witness who claimed Daniel owed money to men far more dangerous than Travis. But the damage had been done. The jury had seen with their own eyes, and once a seed of certainty was planted, it was hard to pull out. In the gallery, Claire sat frozen, her heart pounding with every word. Part of her wanted to believe Travis, wanted to believe someone else, anyone else, had taken Daniel. But the video, the glove, the anger in Travis's own words, it all pointed back to the man who had once toasted them at their anniversary dinner. During a recess, Marcus found Claire in the hallway, her face pale as marble. He did it, didn't he? She whispered. Marcus's voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. The evidence says he did. But Claire, the deeper I dig, the more I wonder, was Travis the only one? She stared at him, her lips trembling. If he wasn't, then who else wanted Daniel dead badly enough to help? The question lingered like smoke, haunting them both as the trial pushed forward toward its climax. The courtroom was silent when the jury filed back in. The shuffle of their shoes on the polished floor echoed louder than any gavel. Claire Dawson sat rigid in her seat, her hands clutched tightly together, her nails digging crescents into her palms. Detective Marcus Hill stood along the back wall, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the foreman. Judge Harris cleared his throat, his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair, rose slowly. His face betrayed nothing, though the weight of the room pressed against his shoulders. He held a slip of paper in his hand, and with deliberate care, he read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMillan, guilty of murder in the first degree." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A woman stifled a cry. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Claire's breath caught in her throat as the words sank in. Travis's head dropped into his hands. His attorney leaned close, whispering something that was drowned out by the murmurs swelling through the room. Judge Harris struck the gavel. "Order. Order in the court." He turned his gaze on Travis. "You have been found guilty of murder in the first degree. Sentencing will be carried out immediately. For this crime, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The sound of the gavel striking again was final, like a coffin closing. Claire felt tears streak her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Relief surged through her. Justice had been served. And yet, it wasn't the kind of relief that lifted weight from her shoulders. It was heavy, suffocating. The man who had sat at her dinner table, who had once laughed with her husband in her backyard, was now condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars. She stood slowly, gripping the edge of the bench for balance. Travis lifted his head then, his eyes bloodshot, his face twisted in anguish. For one fleeting moment, their eyes met. His lips moved, though no sound carried across the courtroom. Claire could read the words, "All the same, I didn't do it." Her heart lurched. She turned away quickly, unwilling to let the doubt poison her now. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with reporters' questions, microphones thrust forward like weapons. "Mrs. Dawson, do you feel justice was done? Do you believe Travis acted alone? What about Daniel's debts? Are you worried for your safety?" She pushed through the chaos, Lydia at her side, Marcus close behind to shield her from the swarm. The cameras flashed relentlessly, the questions chasing her all the way to the car. Only once the doors shut did Claire allow herself to exhale. Her chest heaved with sobs, her voice breaking. "It's over, right? Tell me it's over, detective." Marcus studied her in the rearview mirror, his voice steady but far from reassuring. "It's over for Travis. But something tells me Daniel's sins didn't end with him." Claire buried her face in her hands. She wanted to believe Marcus was wrong, that this nightmare was finally behind her. But the memory of the anonymous text, the chilling message that promised "you're next," clawed at her mind. If Travis was behind bars, who had sent it? Later that night, Claire sat alone in Lydia's kitchen, staring at the cup of tea she hadn't touched. The silence of the house pressed in on her. When a branch scraped against the window outside, she jumped, her nerves frayed to breaking. She whispered into the empty air, her voice trembling. "Daniel, what did you do to us? What kind of darkness did you drag into our lives?" For the first time, Claire realized the trial's verdict hadn't brought closure. It had opened another door, one that led deeper into the shadows Daniel had left behind. Weeks passed, but the echoes of the trial lingered in Claire Dawson's life like an unshakable shadow. The verdict had been rendered, the gavel had fallen, and Travis McMillan now sat in a prison cell. Yet for Claire, the promise of peace remained just out of reach. Her home, the house she had once filled with love, laughter, and the smell of Sunday dinners, was still sealed with crime scene tape. Every time she drove past, her stomach knotted, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. She couldn't imagine stepping foot inside again. The kitchen, once her sanctuary, had become a nightmare etched into her mind forever. She lived with her sister Lydia now, sleeping in a spare room that smelled faintly of lavender. Lydia tried her best to comfort her, but some wounds ran too deep. Nights were the hardest. Claire would lie awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by images she couldn't erase. The boiling pot, the acrid smell, Daniel's hand emerging from the water. Sometimes she woke in a cold sweat, gasping for air, convinced she could still hear the hiss of that stove. Detective Marcus Hill checked in on her often. One evening, he stopped by Lydia's house, standing on the porch with his usual serious expression. Claire invited him in, and they sat at the kitchen table. The silence stretched before Marcus finally spoke. "You should know," he began. "We traced that threatening text you got." Claire's eyes widened. "And?" Marcus exhaled, his jaw tightening. "It was sent from a burner phone. No traceable owner. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks." Her stomach dropped. "So it wasn't Travis?" Marcus shook his head. "No, and that's what keeps me up at night. Travis was guilty, no doubt about that. But I don't think he was alone. Daniel made enemies, Claire. The kind who don't disappear just because one man is behind bars." The words chilled her. "So I'm still not safe?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady but low. "I'll make sure nothing happens to you. But Claire, you need to understand. Justice doesn't always mean closure. Sometimes it just stops the bleeding." Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "Then what am I supposed to do? How do I live with this?" Marcus's gaze softened. "One day at a time. That's all any of us can do." After he left, Claire sat alone at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. She thought of Daniel, the man she had loved, the man she had trusted. She remembered the way he laughed, the way he kissed her forehead when she was tired, the way he promised her forever. And then she remembered the lies, the debts, the affairs, the betrayals. Her grief twisted into something sharper. Daniel had left her with nothing but broken pieces. But as much as she hated him for it, she also knew she couldn't carry him with her forever. A week later, Claire returned to the Dawson home one final time. The tape had been removed, the locks changed. She stepped into the kitchen, the air heavy with silence. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to walk to the stove. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where her life had shattered. Then, with trembling hands, she lit a match and dropped it into the trash bin filled with old papers and debris. Flames licked upward, devouring the remnants of the life she no longer wanted. As the fire grew, Claire whispered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I walked into hell that night, but I walked out alive, and that has to be enough." She closed the door behind her and didn't look back. As she walked down the driveway, the cool evening air against her damp cheeks, Claire's phone buzzed in her pocket. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. One new message. Unknown number. Her eyes scanned the glowing screen. Justice was only the beginning. It's not over. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stand tall, clutching the phone tightly. The fire behind her popped and hissed, casting eerie shadows across the yard, as though mocking her fragile sense of closure. Claire's chest heaved as fear and fury collided inside her. For a brief moment, she almost hurled the phone into the flames, but stopped. Whoever had sent the message wanted her terrified, broken. She refused to give them that satisfaction. She slid the phone back into her pocket and whispered into the night, her voice trembling but fierce. "You don't scare me. Not anymore." Still, as she walked away, the weight of those words clung to her. Somewhere in the darkness, an enemy remained unseen, and Daniel's shadow stretched further than she ever imagined. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in streaks of gold and crimson. For the first time in weeks, Claire drew a deep breath and let it out slowly. The past would always haunt her, but she was still standing. And in that fragile strength, she found the beginning of something she thought she'd lost forever: hope.